Dust Creek baked beneath a sky the color of ash, where the wind didn't blow so much as it whispered dry secrets through dying grass. The town lay low in the belly of the plains, surrounded by rust-colored canyons, like broken teeth biting down on its edges. 47 people lived there, give or take a birth or a death. Most of them didn't talk much anymore. There wasn't much left to say. On the far edge of town, where the sagebrush thickened and the trail turned to hardpan, stood a crooked little ranch with a splintered fence and a barn that leaned like an old drunk. Silas Ward lived there. He hadn't always lived alone, but the world had taken more from him than it had given back. Now it was just him, a stubborn crow named Jasper, and the creak of floorboards that only echoed when he walked slow enough to hear them. Silas was a tall man once, shoulders broad like a rail beam, back straight as a rifle barrel. Now he walked with a limp that bent him sideways, leaning heavy on a cane carved from an old fence post. His left knee, shattered during a skirmish on the Pecos River, groaned with every step. His hands were thick, scarred, and sun-dark, like leather left too long in the sun. Most folks in Dust Creek had forgotten what Silas used to be. A sharpshooter, a quiet legend with 20 notches on his stock and one on his heart. That evening, the light was low and gold, stretching long shadows across the dry earth. Silas moved slow around the barn, bucket in one hand, cane in the other. Jasper sat on the fence post, watching the sun bleed itself, dry across the sky. The door to the grain shed creaked. Not from wind. Silas stopped. He listened. The scrape of a boot. A breath. A hush that didn't belong. He rounded the corner without hurry, as though he were greeting an old friend. There she was. Barefoot, clothes torn, hair tangled with burrs and dust. A girl. No, a young woman, maybe 20, half-starved and crouched low with a burlap sack in her arms, scooping up handfuls of cracked corn. She froze when she saw him, eyes wild like a caged animal, back hunched like a stray ready to bolt. Silas didn't raise his voice. That feed's mostly for the chickens, but they ain't ones to hold grudges. She straightened, sack still clutched tight. Dirt smudged her face, sunburn blazed across her nose and cheeks. Her lips were cracked, her hands trembled, but her jaw was locked like iron. "I ain't begging," she said. "I didn't say you were." "I'll go," she snapped, stepping backward. Just let me go." Silas looked at her, not just her face, but the way she stood. She was thin as wire, but something in her shoulders said she'd fought through things most folks wouldn't survive. He saw the bruises on her forearms, the way she flinched when Jasper cawed from the fence. "You can take it," Silas said after a long pause. "Take it all." She blinked, stunned. "But you don't look like you got anywhere worth going," he added, shifting his weight with a grunt. "So if you want, you can stay." Her breath caught. She didn't believe him. He could see it plain. People like her didn't get kindness without price. She turned slightly, half expecting a trap, maybe a shotgun behind the door. But there was only an old man with a limp, offering a sack of corn and a place to rest. "Why?" she whispered. He shrugged. "Don't much like ghosts hanging around the barn. Rather feed a hungry soul than bury one." For a long time, neither of them moved. The wind kicked up some dust, stirred the hem of her dress. Silas turned and walked back toward the house, without looking to see if she followed. Jasper fluttered after him, wings flapping lazily. The porch creaked under his boots. He didn't glance over his shoulder when he opened the door. She stood there for another full minute. Then she dropped the sack, walked to the porch, and sat on the bottom step, silent. That night, the house was quiet save for the ticking of an old clock and the low rustle of someone trying to sleep without trust. Silas laid out a blanket near the hearth and left a plate of beans and cornbread beside it. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer one. But when dawn touched the windows, she was still there, curled tight under the blanket, eyes shut, arms wrapped around her ribs like she might vanish otherwise. Silas brewed coffee as the sky turned pink. Jasper pecked at the window, demanding breakfast. The girl, still wordless, rose and swept the floor before he asked. Her movements were unsure, but her gaze sharper now, like a stray dog daring to hope the hand wouldn't strike. Outside, The land stretched wide and dry and aching. But inside that little ranch house, something fragile stirred. Not trust, not yet, but a beginning. A step. Silas didn't ask why she was running. He just poured her coffee, slid the cup her way, and said, "Sun's already high. Chickens won't feed themselves." She took the cup, drank it slow, and nodded. She didn't smile. But she didn't run. Not that day. Not the next. And somewhere in the silence between them, the old man and the girl began something that didn't yet have a name. The days unfolded slowly, like pages in an old ledger, sun-creased and weathered but steady. Clara stayed. She didn't say much at first, but she didn't run either. Each morning, Silas found some small sign. She was settling in. A swept floor, water hauled from the well, the old mule brushed down in the shed. She moved like someone used to work, not rest. Her hands were calloused, her shoulders lean from hunger, but her eyes, those stayed sharp, always watching. It was on the third morning that she spoke her name. Silas had just handed her a chipped tin cup of coffee, steam curling in the cool dawn air. "Clara," she said softly, not looking up. "My name's Clara." He nodded once and sipped his brew. "Silas." They didn't say much more that day, but something shifted. Not like a door flung open, more like a window cracked just enough to let fresh air in. By the week's end, Clara was riding the fence line, mending broken rails with wire she found in the barn. She was fast with knots, smart with tools. Horses responded to her like they knew her heart. She had a way of whispering to them that calmed even the jumpy roan mare Silas couldn't ride anymore. He watched her from the porch sometimes, not as a man watches a mystery, but the way one watches rain fall on dry ground. Something returning, something needed. Clara still flinched at sudden noises. She kept her back to walls when she could. Bruises marked her arms like fading fingerprints, and when Silas asked if she needed anything, she'd shake her head with a tension that said she didn't want kindness if it had strings. Silas didn't press. He knew what it meant to carry ghosts. Years ago, more than he cared to count, he'd ridden with a cavalry unit out of Kansas. They'd seen too much, done worse. After the war, he'd come west to forget, to bury the blood under honest work and quiet days. He found Margaret, and for a while the world softened. They'd carved out a life on that ranch with their son Caleb, a boy with his mother's laugh and his father's eyes. But fire came one night, riding on the backs of outlaws, men with whiskey breath and black hearts. The Dreckers, they called themselves. They left Silas for dead and burned everything that bore his name. Margaret and Caleb never made it out. Only Jasper survived, feathers scorched, beak broken. Silas buried his family in a grove of twisted junipers and never picked up a rifle again. Not until now. Clara didn't know any of that. She never asked, and Silas never told her. But when the nights got quiet and the lantern burned low, he caught her listening, really listening, as he muttered to Jasper or talked to the fire. She didn't laugh when he told stories, not always. But sometimes, when he made a dry remark about the mule being smarter than half the town, she smiled. That smile, small, crooked, real, was worth more than gold. One evening, they sat on the porch together, the sky turning violet over the rim of the canyon. Crickets stirred. The earth smelled of dust and wood smoke. Clara leaned back in a rocking chair, boots propped on the rail. Silas poured her a second cup of coffee. "Ever think about leaving?" she asked. He took his time answering. "Used to," he said. "Then I figured if I stayed long enough, maybe the land'd remember me kindly." Clara nodded slowly. "I never stayed anywhere. Not really." "You could, if you wanted," Silas said, voice low. She didn't answer, but the next morning she was up before him, gathering eggs from the coop like she'd always belonged. Later that week, Silas noticed something odd. Just a moment, barely there. A footprint in the dust near the back of the barn, too deep for Clara's weight. He crouched and touched it. Boot print. Fresh. And not his. He said nothing to Clara. Just watched a little closer. Walked the fence with a rifle over his shoulder he hadn't touched in years. The stock still bore the names of his wife and son, carved deep. He oiled it that night, slow and silent, while Clara slept near the hearth. Something was coming. He could feel it. The land was too quiet. The birds were nervous. Jasper paced the porch rail like a sentry. Clara didn't ask about the rifle. Silas didn't ask about the bruise he saw blooming fresh on her back when her shirt lifted in the wind. They just sat together again that night, watching the moon rise. Two shadows on a porch in a forgotten corner of the world. Two broken things, waiting for the past to catch up. They came in on a hot wind. 5 riders out of the south, with dust devils spinning behind them like the ghosts of men they'd already buried. Their horses were foam-flecked and scarred, nostrils flared, hooves thundering through the silence of mid-morning like war drums. Dust Creek hadn't seen strangers in months, not armed ones, and not carrying themselves like death was just part of their business. At the head rode Hawkdrenner. He wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Folks in 3 counties whispered his name like a curse. Hawk, with his vultureline frame, hair slicked back with grease, a jagged scar slashing from ear to jaw like a crooked smile carved by the devil himself. His eyes were yellow-green, snake eyes, always watching, never blinking. He wore a pistol low on his right hip and a skinning knife on his belt. The pistol wasn't for killing, the knife was. He killed with his hands when he wanted to remember it. The other 4 were mean in their own ways. Ex-soldiers turned feral. 2 of them with wanted posters curling on every saloon wall, from Dodge to El Paso. Together, they called themselves the Dreckers. And when they rode into town, the townsfolk disappeared like mist. Doors closed. Windows shuttered. No law in Dust Creek anymore. Just a silent agreement to survive quietly. Clara was hauling water from the well when she heard the hooves. At first, she didn't look. She was used to echoes, wind tricks. But the stillness that followed stopped her. The bucket slipped from her fingers and splashed onto her boots. She turned, and her breath went sharp. Her skin went pale. Blood drained from her cheeks like someone had cut a string inside her. Hawk sat tall on his saddle, surveying the town. He hadn't seen her yet, but she saw him. She dropped the second bucket and turned back toward the house, fast. Inside, Silas was cutting jerky with a dull blade, squinting through the afternoon sun. Clara slammed the door shut behind her, chest heaving. "They're here," she gasped. "The Dreckers." "Hawk." Silas looked up, calm. "Hawkdrenner." She nodded, eyes wide. He wiped his hands on a rag. "You know him?" Clara didn't sit. "Couldn't. He's my stepbrother. I ran 2 months ago. He wanted me to join them. Said blood belonged to blood. When I said no, he hit me. Told me I was going to be part of their next job, whether I wanted to or not." Silas frowned, already halfway to the wall where his old rifle hung like a forgotten memory. "I took something before I ran," Clara whispered. "A satchel, small, full of cash from a failed job near Tucson. I didn't know what it was until after. I just grabbed it." "How much?" "Enough to kill over." Outside, a rider laughed, cold and far away. Clara flinched. Silas looked at her long and hard, the way a man looks at a storm on the horizon and knows it won't miss him. Then he nodded, went to the corner, and opened the old cedar chest. Inside lay a second rifle, clean but aged, his wife's. "Can you shoot?" he asked. She hesitated. "I can." He handed her the rifle, but first, like a father handing a torch to the next in line. "Then shoot straight, and don't waste bullets on warnings. Word travels quick in small towns, even when mouths stay shut." A boy named Eli, no older than 10, rode hard out to the ranch just before sundown. His face was streaked with dirt and fear. "I heard him in the saloon," he panted. "They're looking for her. Said they'll come out here after dark. Said they ain't leaving without what's theirs." Silas gave him a biscuit and told him to ride home and stay inside. Then he locked the door, bolted the windows, pulled down the lanterns, and scattered powder across the floor to trace footsteps in the dark. Clara stood by the hearth, holding the rifle tight, shoulders squared but trembling. The satchel, now packed tight with cash and sealed in waxcloth, sat under the floorboards, right where Silas had hidden it. Outside, the wind picked up. Jasper circled above, cawing like a prophet with bad news. Clara moved through the house like a shadow, helping silently, her face set in stone. "You don't have to do this," she said once. voice barely above breath. I'm not, Silas replied. You are. I'm just too old to run. They laughed, a quiet, tired thing, and that laugh held them together through the waiting. As night fell, the world shrank to the ranch house. Every creak of wood, every groan of the wind became a signal. Clara took the loft. Silas stayed below, seated in his old rocking chair with a rifle across his knees and the cane beside him. His bad knee throbbed like a second heartbeat. It wasn't long before they heard the hooves again. 4 riders now. One had stayed in town, maybe to watch. The others fanned out, their silhouettes black against the moonlight, drifting like wolves. They didn't call out, didn't yell threats. This wasn't a standoff, this was a hunt. A boot crunched gravel outside the door. Another circled toward the barn. Silas stood, slow, like waking from a long sleep. Jasper flapped down to the porch rail and went still. Then a voice, Hawk's, low and lazy. Clara girl, don't make this worse than it has to be. She didn't answer, just chambered around. You owe us. You know you do. Another click upstairs. Clara steadying her aim. She ain't here. Silas called. Hawk chuckled. Old man, you're half dead. You really gonna die for her? No, Silas said, leveling the rifle at the door. I'm just gonna kill you for fun. The silence that followed was brief. Then chaos. A window shattered upstairs. Return fire. Clara hit one rider clean off his saddle. Silas dropped another as he came around the corner. Bullets punched holes in the siding, cracked boards. Glass exploded from a kitchen window. Clara yelled something, fired again. Someone screamed. Silas stepped onto the porch, cane in one hand, rifle in the other. His shot caught the third man in the chest. The fourth lunged at him, blade raised. Too close. Silas swung the cane like a hammer, smashing teeth and sending the man reeling. Then Hawk was there. He moved like a rattlesnake, knife in hand, catching Silas in the ribs with a slash. Silas grunted, staggered back. Hawk moved in again. The rifle fired. Hawk froze mid-stride. Blood bloomed across his back. He turned, shocked, eyes finding Clara at the loft window. The rifle still smoked in her hands. He dropped to his knees, looked at her, then at Silas, almost like he recognized something too late, and fell forward into the dust. Silence again. Heavy. Final. Silas collapsed into the rocker, hand pressed to his side. Clara burst out of the house seconds later, dropping beside him. You all right? He nodded barely. Damn fool still used a knife. She helped him inside, trembling. I thought I lost you. He smiled weakly. Not yet. Jasper caught above them, circling once more before settling on the roof. The night held still, listening. Outside, the desert swallowed the blood without question. The evening bled red across the sky, the sun dipping behind the canyon spires like it was hiding from what was coming. The land breathed in dust and silence. An eerie hush draped across the plains. The ranch stood quiet beneath it, tucked into the natural bend of 2 stone ridges and backed by a thicket of dry brush and scrub oak. Most men would have seen it as vulnerable, but Silas Ward had chosen that spot 40 years ago, not for beauty, but for how the land whispered back when danger came calling. He moved through the property, like a man returning to something sacred. His steps were slow, but deliberate. Every outcropping, every slant of rock, every dry gully held memory. He knew where echoes carried and where they died. He set lanterns in strange places, misdirection. Dug in behind the water trough. Planted glass bottles along the trail where boots might carelessly tread. Clara watched him from the porch, rifle pressed against her shoulder like it was an extension of her spine. Her hands were steady now. The fear that had once ruled her had calcified into something else, resolve, cold and sharp. They'll come before full dark, Silas muttered, more to himself than her. Cowards like sunset. It lets them pretend they ain't sneaking. Clara nodded. She wore her hair tied back tight, sleeves rolled to her elbows, dust on her face and under her nails. She didn't ask if they were going to survive. She just asked where he needed her. Loft window. South side. If they come fast, that's where they'll break through. She climbed the ladder in silence. Above, the house stretched toward the dying sun, every window flickering with golden light, like a beacon daring the darkness to come. They didn't wait long. The first cry came like a crow's scream, cutting across the silence. Then the thunder of hooves, 5, maybe 6, galloping hard. Then the sound of boots dismounting, the dry crackle of brush disturbed by bodies crouching low. "Clara!" One voice called out, sing-song and cruel. "You forgot to leave a note, sweetheart." She held her breath, finger on the trigger. Another voice, taunting, nasal, spat out, "Ain't no use hiding, little bird. We already clip your wings." Silas, crouched beneath the porch with his rifle trained down the slope, could see them moving, shadows shifting behind rocks, inching closer. They didn't know the land. They didn't know he had spent years listening to how the canyon walls played tricks with sound. He whispered to Jasper, perched just behind him, "Get on up now." The crow flapped into the air, wings like paper tearing the silence. A shot cracked from the loft window. One of the outlaws stumbled out from behind a mesquite bush, clutching his shoulder and screaming. Another shot followed, and he dropped like wet cloth into the dust. Clara exhaled. Hawk had taught her to shoot, standing behind her, barking corrections with a hand that was too firm and too greedy. But she had learned more watching his mistakes than his lessons. Aim with breath. Wait for movement. Shoot for what they think you don't see. The other Drekkers spread out, yelling now, furious and reckless. Gunfire exploded from the ridge, ricocheting off stone and plank. The house shook under the barrage, with splintering, windows cracking. Silas moved through the darkness like he was made from it. His cane clicked softly across the ground, until he pressed a button near the handle and drew a short-barreled shotgun from its hollowed heart. He crouched behind a hay bale and waited. A rider charged the barn, hooting like a banshee. Silas rose slowly, aimed and fired. The boom rattled the coop. The man flew backward off his saddle, a bloom of red across his chest, breath gone before his body hit the dirt. Clara, reloading upstairs, caught sight of a figure slinking through the orchard, too quick for her shot. She ducked low and crawled across the loft to the west window, keeping her belly flat. She opened the shutter just enough to see Hawk. He stood near the tree line, pistol drawn, still as a hawk waiting to strike. The others moved around him, but he didn't shout, didn't flinch. He waited, studied, learning the shape of the defense. Clara swallowed hard. That stare, it was the same one he gave before breaking horses or bones. Then she saw it. His eyes weren't searching for her. They were looking for Silas. He knew. She climbed down, fast and quiet. "Where's your cane?" she asked, finding Silas crouched behind the rain barrels, bleeding from the arm. "Used it," he grunted. "He's here, isn't he?" She nodded. "He's not going to stop." "No, he won't." He stood, slower this time. Blood ran in rivulets down his sleeve. The left side of his coat was torn. "Then we ended." Clara blinked, stunned by the certainty in his voice. She wanted to ask how, wanted to say no, but all she did was chamber one more round. The wind shifted. Dust curled at the corners of the barn. Silas stepped out into the open with a shotgun across his arm and a revolver at his hip. The clouds above glowed orange, like the heavens themselves were burning. "Drenner," he shouted into the night. And from the shadow of the trees, Hawk stepped forward. He moved like a man approaching a grave. He dug himself. The knife was back on his belt. His pistol glinted in the dusk. But there was no laughter now. "I knew she'd run to someone," he said, voice low. "Didn't think it'd be an old cripple." "She's not yours," Silas said. "She's blood. So were the ones I buried after you burned their house." That stopped Hawk cold. Silas lifted the revolver. "Your boys are dead. One by one." Hawk drew first. Silas fired, but not at him. The bullet caught the rock behind Hawk, shattering into dust. Clara stepped into view from the side, rifle raised. Hawk turned, just in time to see her fire. The shot punched through his side. He spun, staggered, and raised his pistol. Silas stepped forward, interposing himself without thought. The gun fired. Clara screamed. Silas didn't fall. The bullet had caught the edge of his belt buckle, bruised, not broken. And before Hawk could fire again, Silas raised the shotgun. Their eyes met, one last flicker of recognition. Then the blast. Hawk collapsed into the dirt, still reaching for something that would never be his. The air went quiet. The surviving Drekkers fled into the canyon, like rats chased by thunder. The wind carried their panic far down the ridgeline. Clara dropped the rifle, ran to Silas, grabbing his arm, checking his side. He winced but stayed standing. "You should be dead," she whispered. "I am," he said softly. "Just forgot to lie down." Together, they stood over Hawk's body as the sun finally disappeared and the stars spilled across the blackened sky. The land exhaled. Justice had come, not as vengeance, but as survival, as truth. Morning broke slow and gold, light spreading across the plains, like a bomb poured over wounds not yet closed. The air was heavy with gunpowder and silence. Smoke still curled lazily from a charred corner of the barn, and the ground outside the ranch was pocked with footprints and blood. Buzzards circled low in the distance, their shadows sweeping the land like the hands of a clock ticking past something final. Clara sat on the front step with her boots off, one hand cradling a bandaged arm where the bullet had grazed her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had used up all her tears the night before. Beside her, Silas rocked slowly in his chair, ribs bound tight beneath his shirt. Every breath a quiet reminder of the fight they'd survived. He sipped at the bitter coffee she'd brewed, the kind that tasted more like river mud than morning, but he drank it like it was ambrosia. Claire didn't say much, but she stayed close. They both did. The porch was their shelter now, their quiet place. Neither wanted to go inside just yet, not while the echoes still clung to the walls. The first townsfolk came just after dawn, walking in pairs, cautious, eyes scanning the scene like they weren't sure it was real. They stopped short at the fence, unsure if they should go closer. Sheriff had long since left town, and Dust Creek had learned to keep its head down. But this morning, heads lifted. Old Roy Ballinger was the first to speak. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, squinting at the bodies laid out near the barn. "That's Hawk Drenner. I bet my last tooth." "He don't look so tall dead," someone else said. "They're gone?" asked Miss Laverne, holding a child's hand. Silas nodded once, slow. "Ain't writing again." Word spread like fire through dry brush. By noon, the whole town knew. The Drekkers were finished. Hawk Drenner had met his end, and not in a blaze of glory. In the dust outside the ranch of a man they'd nearly forgotten. A man who once limped to town for feed and never spoke unless spoken to. A man who, until now, had let time bury him quietly. But he hadn't stood alone. Clara's name passed from lips with surprise, then awe. The girl who'd showed up starved and speechless. The one with the hard eyes and mystery bruises. The one who'd fired first. The one who hadn't missed. A few brought food. Others brought wood to fix the broken fence. No one asked too many questions, not yet. But their eyes kept drifting to Clara, measuring, wondering. She helped bury the bodies herself. All but Hawk. His was burned that afternoon, alone, without ceremony. She stood silent while the flames rose, not with hate, but with something colder. Resignation, maybe. Like she was burning the last tie to something she didn't want to remember. Later, as they sat together again in the low light, a man in his 70s approached the porch. His skin was leathery, and his coat was patched, but his eyes were sharp as flint. "Girl," he said, tapping his hat back on his head. "You said your name was Clara, didn't you?" She nodded. "What's the rest of it?" Clara hesitated. Silas watched her carefully, not pressing, just present. She drew in a breath, slow and full of dust. "Harrigan," she said. "Clara Harrigan." The old man's eyebrows lifted. "Harrigan? As in Marshall Dorian Harrigan?" She looked him square in the eye. "He's my father." A murmur rolled through the few that had gathered. Roy nearly dropped his pipe. Laverne whispered something to her daughter. "I'll be," the man muttered. "That girl ain't nobody's orphan after all. Marshall Harrigan. He used to clean out gangs from here to Montana. Rode with honor. Folks said he was unbreakable." Claire didn't smile. "He wasn't," she said simply. "He broke plenty." And that was all she gave. The whispers changed. They grew quiet, respectful. People began to see her differently, not as some runaway girl with a rifle, but as something made from the same iron as the badge that once ruled the frontier. She never claimed the name for power. She had run from it once, but the blood in her veins had stood its ground when it counted, and Dust Creek wasn't likely to forget that. Weeks passed. The porch got repainted, the bullet holes patched, the barn rebuilt with sturdier beams. Silas, ribs still sore but healing, carved a new sign for the gate. Nothing fancy, just a name burned into oak. Ward and Harrigan. They never said it aloud, but Clara understood. It wasn't about ownership. It was about place. Belonging. 2 names carved into the land. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to. Silas added a second room to the house, and when they finished building it, she planted wildflowers in front of the window. Bluebells. The only thing soft she'd ever called her own. He let her keep the rifle. In the evenings, they still sat together, coffee between them, Jasper perched on the railing, occasionally squawking at the mule like he ran the place. They talked more now. Sometimes about the past. Sometimes about nothing. But always with ease, like old friends who didn't need to fill the silence to know what it meant. Clara rode into town twice a week. Folks greeted her by name. One boy asked her to teach him how to shoot. She said no, not yet. Silas didn't limp as hard anymore. He still moved slow, but there was strength in it now, not just stubbornness. When people spoke of the Dreckers, they spoke of the night. They met their end not at the hands of lawmen or marshals, but a girl with fire in her belly and an old man with ghosts in his eyes. No one knew what would come next. Dust Creek was still a hard place, but something had shifted, something had steadied, and in the quiet evenings, when the wind moved soft across the land and the sky turned purple over the ridge, stories began to form. Some said she saved him, dragged the soul back into the body of a man who'd already laid down to die. Others said he saved her, gave her the space to be more than the blood she ran from. But in Dust Creek, they didn't argue about it much. They just said this. When the Dreckers rode in, Justice limped out to meet them and never looked back.